Hey, welcome back to the series lesson 2 here in the series in which we will talk about tips for beginners and even more for advanced players, where I will talk about things that the game doesn't really show you but that are very important to understanding the game in a deeper sense, making better decisions, winning more games and thereby becoming a better player in ranked or in tournaments if you want to do that. In this today's episode, which probably will be a shorter one, I want to first talk about chain blocking, which is something you might have already heard of, and then I also want, because it's somewhat related to that, talk about mandatory effects and how they are chained. So obviously chaining is one of the more complex topics of Yu-Gi-Oh! And we will definitely talk about this in future episodes as well. So chain blocking, you might have already heard it, you might have already done it. First things first, what you want to activate in the settings to be able to chain block, otherwise it will be done for you, is this setting here. Activation order settings on. You can also turn this on off, then the game basically does it by itself. Select the order of activation when multiple cards can be activated simultaneously. This is also known as SEGOC, simultaneous effects going on chain, which means if there are multiple effects, we will see this in a moment, happening at the same time. Given that they are all effects that you can activate, not effects that you must activate, which I said we will talk about in a moment here. This is a special case, but if there are multiple effects that you can activate, you can yourself decide which ones you want to put into the chains first and how you want to put them into a chain. So basic knowledge here. Building a chain basically means the things that are going first into the chain. So you build the chain from chaining 1 to, for example, 7, and then you resolve the chain from chaining 7 to 1. So whatever you put in first will be the thing that will resolve last. And the idea of chain blocking is so that you can block the effects that you really need to resolve in order for them to be resolved. But enough talking, let me show you what this means. So a pretty basic example here. Let's activate Branded Loss. This will be one of the effects that will be ready in a moment. Then we will go a Branded Fusion here. I will just go for the Lubelion. Doesn't really matter what I'm taking here. I need an Albas, of course. And then in this case, I will also send one of my tragedies here, so I can show you what I mean. We are getting the Lubelion, and now here come the chain links. So as you can see right here, and as I already said, this will only be available to you if you have activated this activation order settings. Otherwise, it will be done automatically. I'm not quite sure how the game does it, but it's bad, so don't do it. Please have it on. So what you can now decide is which do you want to be chaining 1, 2, and 3, because all of these effects activate at the same time, right? This one says here, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Despia monster from your deck to your hand. This happened right now because this was sent to the graveyard. This also activates because it says if this card is fusion summoned, you can discard 1 card, fusion summon 1 level 8, blah blah blah. This also activates because it happened right now. So we made a fusion summon, so this activates, this went to the graveyard, so this activates, and then this also says, where is it? If you fusion summon a monster, you can add 1 Fallen of Albas or 1 monster that mentions it. So there are 3 effects that have activated at the same time, giving us the opportunity to basically decide for ourselves what we want to do with this chain. And now the idea of chain blocking is that, for example, this one would add us a Despia monster from our deck to our hand. Let's just say we wanted to protect this effect, because obviously you could Ash this, right? Because Ash can negate an effect that adds a card from deck to hand. So let's just say we want to save this effect. This is the effect that we really want to go through. Then we would put this on chaining first. This is now, or we could also place it chaining 2, but we would not place it on the 3rd position in the chaining. This is now the first thing in the chain, indicated by the 1 here, and will be the last thing that resolves. So normally, if we would not have multiple effects that we can activate here, our opponent could now put the Ash here and negate our effect. But he can't, because we are still in the process of resolving or ordering our chain links that have activated at the same time. So let's, for example, decide that we now are going to want to activate the Branded Loss. This also searches a card, so we might also want to protect this from Ash. And then we chain block these other effects with our Lubelion, which is now chain link 3. And then we have to pay the cost for this card, which is discarding. And now we have built a chain that will now resolve backwards. Doesn't really matter what we do here. We can just make a mirror jade just for funsies here, right? Go and make a mirror jade, and then our next chaining comes. We can add a card, we can add the Mercuria, and then we can also add from the Despian Tragedy, let's add another Aluba. So, and this is the basic idea of chain blocking, and there are a lot of instances in which you will be able to chain block stuff. You always have to think about what do you want to chain block, what do you want this to be protected against. Obviously there are also cards like Ghost Bell that can negate stuff that you activate from the graveyard, so you might also want to protect against the Ghost Bell or something. Note here that this order that we now have put the cards in would not have protected us from negations that are targeted, so our opponent, if he would have had it, could have activated an Imperm targeting our Lubelion here, and then he could have negated our Lubelion if the Lubelion was the one thing that we would have wanted to chain block and that we have put in Chain Link 1, for example. So this can only, or does only, work against things that do not target, like the Ash or Ghost Bell, for example, but this is the basic concept of chain blocking. The important thing, as I said before, is that we have to have effects that we can activate, not that we must activate. But we will look at this in a moment, so you will understand how effects work that must be activated. Hey guys, just a quick one. If you want to support the channel, then please consider subscribing, as at the moment only 13% of the people who are regularly watching the channel are subscribed, while 87% are not. If you want to help me out, I would be very grateful. And now let's continue with the video. So to now understand mandatory effects and how they interact with the chain, or how they are going on the chain, I have set up a different situation. We have one effect here that is mandatory, meaning we have to activate this, and one effect that is a can effect, meaning we can activate this. Let's read it first so we understand. The card says, once per turn, if a face-up Purely XYZ monster you control, this one here, leaves the field because of an opponent's card, we will crash him battle phase into here, that counts. Special summon one level 1 Purely monster from your deck or graveyard. The mandatory effect is signaled here by the missing of the word can. We cannot choose, we have to do this. This is mandatory, there is no can. In comparison, the My Friend Purely, which has a similar effect, says, if a face-up Purely XYZ monster you control leaves the field because of an opponent's cards, even during the damage step, you can add up to 3 Purely quick play spells with different names from your graveyard to your hand. So we have one mandatory effect and one can effect. So let's see what happens here. We are going to battle so we can activate these effects. And now you can see that the first thing that activates, and we can't do anything about this, even though we have set this this here on, is the mandatory effect. So the mandatory effect is Chain Link 1, we couldn't decide. And now we have the opportunity, the can opportunity, to either activate the can effect or to not activate it. Let's say we are activating it. And same thing here, this is Chain Link 1, this is Chain Link 2, and now this will resolve first and then the other one last. So the thing that you have to understand about mandatory effects is that they always will be activated first. And now you might ask, what happens if my opponent also has mandatory or can effects? The rule is that the turn player, so the player which turn it is, in this instant it's my turn, but could also be the case that my opponent is at his turn. The player who is the turn player has to activate mandatory effects first. Then the opponent has to activate mandatory effects if there are any. Then the turn player, I again in this case, can activate my can effects, and then my opponent can also activate his can effects. This could, for example, be the case if, let's just imagine, he also had a stray Purely Street and a My Friend Purely here on the field, and let's say he also had the same thing on the field, the Purely Plump with, I don't know, 600 attack, and I would crash into this. Then the order of the chain would be as follows. My stray Purely Street would be Chain Link 1 because of mandatory, then his Purely Street would be Chain Link 2 because mandatory, then I could decide whether I want to activate My Friend Purely because it's a can effect, and then he could decide whether he wants to activate his My Friend Purely because of can. So this is the difference in how can effects and chain blocking works against effects that are mandatory / can effects. So this is something you always have to keep in mind. This case, for example, would not allow me to chain block anything because I can't decide to put this Chain Link 1 and this Chain Link 2, so I'm not able to, for example, chain block this card here. This is a nifty little thing that you have to be aware of once you are playing with more difficult scenarios. There are obviously also decks that do not have these mandatory effects, and most of the cards have can effects. Especially older cards sometimes have the mandatory text on them. There's also this Dark World card here in the deck list. The Brow, which also says you have to draw a card or draw a card. There's also no can. But this is how effects go on chain, how you can chain block, and how mandatory effects interact with non-mandatory effects. I hope you liked this little lesson, and we will see each other in the next one. If you like these kinds of videos, please consider subscribing, hitting the thumbs up and the notification bell.